All right, well, I think we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining the session. This is François Gay, the founder of the Canadian Cybersecurity Network, and our panel is Failure to Launch, Exploring Why Canada is Failing to Grow Cyber Talent and What Can Be Done to Address It. We're going to talk about some of the challenges. We're going to talk about some of the solutions that could be put in place to help Canada grow cybersecurity talent and for employers to hire that great talent that we have in this country. So I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves one by one, and maybe we'll start with Timothy King.
I will unmute myself. My name is Tim King. I am a high school teacher. I got into cybersecurity in 2017 when I started coaching CyberTitan. But before that, I'd worked in IT for a couple of decades. So got the IT background, but cyber was relatively new then. So my students and I got to the national finals a lot of times. And as a result, I ended up getting my CCNA cyber operations qualification as an instructor. I think I'm still the only teacher in Canada who has it, which is part of the problem we're going to talk about here today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing this. What interested me about this was talking to Francois and the idea that this isn't just an education problem. It's a problem when people come out of education, even if they have the right skills and everything else. And then how do you get into the career? There's gaps there too. So I'm looking forward to this.
Wonderful. George?
Awesome. Thanks, Francois. Really good introduction. That was really cool. So my name is George Okora. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. I'm Chief Information Security Officer for a company called Ruby Life. We focus on the online dating space. Our very well-known leading brand is Ashley Madison. So folks of maybe a prior generation or just aren't fresh out of school might remember that original incident. So it's a job that is very active for a frontline CISO. You're going to experience everything when you're working at a place like this, and it's pretty awesome. From an experiential background, I'm a retired Canadian Canadian Armed Forces Signals Intelligence Specialist. So I took a lot of my security intelligence and SIGINT knowledge and applied it in the cyber field. And I started off as a level 1 analyst in 2016. Taught myself how to do most of the things and wound up in a C-suite position in under 6 years. So I do think it's possible, but I'm kind of perhaps a highly motivated individual, and I certainly wasn't helped out with any sort of systemic approach with an education program, with a job placement program. None of these things existed, and while they are starting to emerge now, the way that I see the protection of our digital national infrastructure and the standardization of getting folks from outside the industry and in the education system and into the actual profession, unfortunately, is sorely lacking. So I'm hoping that this panel can help engage in that discussion.
Thank you, George. Kimberly?
Thanks, Francois. So Kimberly St. Pierre, I'm currently a regional sales manager for CrowdStrike in Western Canada, supporting our major accounts. I've been in technology over 23 years and in business development for almost 30 years. So my perspective is a little different. So I work with a lot of technology executives, whether CIOs or CISOs, and their teams that they support that are often looking to tackle challenges within their business. And quite often they're looking to fill headcount and they struggle to find those resources. I also have the other flip side of that perspective is I mentor a lot of young people that are coming into the technology industry and or the cybersecurity space, and they may be coming right out of school, or they may be somebody that's later on in their career looking to pivot and then bring some of those transferable skill sets. So I'm delighted to have the conversation today. I think there's a lot of great things going on in Canada, but I think there's a ton of work that still needs to be done, and looking forward to diving into that. So thanks.
Thanks, Kimberly. Catherine? Oh, you're on mute, Catherine.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm Kathy. I currently work at a company called Flare. I head up the customer success team there, and FLIR is a continuous threat exposure management platform. So I work specifically with customers and making sure that they get what they need out of the platform. My background is 100% technical in that I started off as a programmer many years ago, and then I moved into project and program management. And I call that out because, we talk about the diverse backgrounds and what's needed to move into cybersecurity. Well, for me, it was through leading digital transformation projects. And back then, going from very analog solutions to digital solutions, security and privacy were coming up as a key requirement. And this is how I learned about security and privacy, specifically working with EMS and long-term care. And so in leaving that, I decided to double down on cybersecurity and work in cybersecurity spaces, specifically, again, from a customer-facing role, whether it be in project management or customer success, because I realized that there was a gap there, even within IT teams. Throw a laptop at a nursing home staff and tell them to use it. Well, it doesn't work that way. You have to have the right controls in place. And so I realized even within IT, there was a knowledge gap in terms of what those key requirements are. So I decided to make my career, cybersecurity. That was about 2016. And I've been working in that area ever since. And so this interests me today because I do, just like Kimberly mentioned, a lot of coaching and mentoring with people who are moving into cybersecurity. Most of them seem to be making a career change. And I'm working often, mentoring and coaching people who are coming from underrepresented communities, a lot of women, a lot of people from people of color, et cetera. And I think there's opportunities there, but I see gaps in the program and the system and in the messaging in terms of what your background has to be, or in terms of what the requirements employers are looking for in order to make this work. And I think there's a lot of room for change and opportunity there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Catherine, and all the panelists. So let's start off by talking about education, and we'll talk about a couple of different areas. And at the end, we will have a Q&A, so please send in your questions and we'll be taking a look at those. Okay, so maybe we'll start with Tim, and then anybody that wants to add to it, whatever, feel free to just jump in. We're going to keep it very easygoing. Why is cybersecurity education in Canada problematic? What's wrong with most of the programs that are out there? We know some are shining, but what are the challenges with education specifically?
Recording. So I came into this, and the reason we were able to do it was because a few years earlier, I DIY'd my lab. And what I mean is I'd taken all of the EdTech computers they'd given us that were locked down, and you could only do very specific things on them, and gave them back to the board. And we basically built our lab out of e-waste. I thought if we're building it from the ground up, from teaching IT for a long time, I thought if you understand everything from the hardware level all the way up, then you're going to be much more comfortable with what we're using the technology for. So I encouraged a lot of other teachers to try and get into CyberTitan when we did, and a lot of them simply couldn't, because the software wouldn't run. And there's simple things like VMware, standard tools that you would find on any cybersecurity practitioner's system. The school boards would just say no to VMware and things like that. So even like Packet Tracer and Cisco, things like that. So if you don't have access to the technology, you can't even begin to develop the digital literacy that you need in it. And I feel that in a lot of cases, school boards have doubled down on that approach. This year, we had Cadets Canada do CyberTitan, and one of the big problems I've heard is that the students don't even know what Windows is. And I said, well, what do they know? And they said Android and iOS, and that's it. So it used to be we could start Cyber Patriot and do the competition, and I could kind of leave the Windows 10 stuff because I knew everybody had some familiarity with it. And then we'd get into server and all the Linux distributions. But at this point, I actually have to back the bus up and even start teaching people what an operating system is, because no one knows anymore. So that's the level of digital fluency you're getting out of education. And then we wonder why we have trouble getting people onto the right tracks into cybersecurity. So from inside the classroom, 20 years at it, there's my take.
Any other thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I can share. So I think Tim actually brought up a really good point. Like if the schools aren't using hands-on the tools that are being used out into the business community. So maybe that's some of those legacy systems, which depending on the industry that an organization is in, those are around. There's a lot of them still. The other thing too, I think, is the network that you need to get a job. You don't come out of school with that network, nor do you know where to find it. I don't know of many jobs that are filled without some sort of connection in advance, whether that's, an introduction through a common connection or somebody that they worked with previously. That is typically the majority of roles. There's some sort of connective tissue there. So I think having the students much earlier on in their studies become aware of what those professional networks are that they may need to join. And I'm a huge proponent of ISACA. I've been a member for a number of years now, 2016. So similar to you, Catherine, when I moved into cyber. And I've been part of that network ever since. And there's tons of students that are part of that group. And I think they start to build their own network. They get to understand who some of the key players are, how those individuals got into the roles that they are in today. I've never seen two cybersecurity career paths mirror one another. They're all very different. But I think using the business tools that are in place in industry today and also having that network earlier on in their education journey is really important.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah. With Tim, I love that it's high school that you're working with, because that's actually how I started in computer science. It was a grade 11 integrated math and computer science class that paved the way for me. And I think about what's happening right now, at least in Ontario, where the government is really making an effort with trades and giving kids opportunities to move into trades and giving them high school credit for internships and giving them these internship hours and giving them certifications at the end of so they graduate high school with a certification ready to go and work. And I think that they need to kind of adopt that principle in other areas, specifically in something as specific as cybersecurity. The earlier we get them started, the better for all of us. And I think if we have teachers like you who are willing to do the work, then I think they should create those opportunities. It also does mean engaging businesses who are willing to do the internships and have those young people in there doing menial things, but exposing them to the environment, exposing them to these tools and teaching them about the industry and the area and building that network as well, Kimberly, if they're getting started that early. So I would love to see more of that happening.
I think Catherine keys on a really important point there. Like Tim's correct in the call out, but Catherine's bringing on the point that organizations have to be willing to provide those internships to give that on-the-ground experience. And they have to have headcount prepared to graduate those students, quote unquote, those interns into full-time salaried roles. I do think in the education system, the biggest problem is a lack of actual on-the-job training, right? Without any sort of OJT period, even within your academic program where, for 3 months or 6 months, you're going to work at this organization, the organization's partnered with the school, the money's taken care of on the back end, the student, they're still a student, but they're working, they're getting real world experience. The problem is, and I say this as someone who has to deal with hiring, I have rejected countless applicants who come at me with an entire plethora of acronym soup for all this for certification that they have. But you actually give them one real world question to test their problem solving and they freeze. So if I'm running a SOC or if I'm running a team and it's a commercial enterprise and we have a board and there's stress to it, because the real world cyber ops, 80%, 90% of the time, dead boring, 10% of the time, psychotic. You need to be able to handle that, right? If they don't have that experience and they're just coming at me with regurgitated scripted knowledge, I can't hire them. I can't place them. I don't even want to risk giving them a shot. That's where the system's failing, I think.
So some great points. And so let me throw another question, because both Catherine and yourself talked about employers, and I don't mind jumping around through this whole conversation. I think it's an excellent point. And, a lot of employers do not take on interns or do not take on co-ops. And this is a major issue. Now, it might be a disconnect between what's going on in universities and colleges and, what's going on with what the employers need. But how do we get employers more easily connected to education early on with institutions and their co-op and internship programs? And how do we get them to make sure that they do have that headcount and commit to these students, at least in some way, shape, or form, so some of these students can get that experience or at least visibility to what it is to work in cybersecurity? So I don't know who wants to take a shot at that first.
I'll
but
jump in. I'll jump in. And I love what Catherine said. She referenced the trades internship, and then George talking a little bit about being a leader that would be hiring some of those individuals. I like to compare the need of cybersecurity to what is happening in the trade. So you are not going to go through BCIT to study to be an electrician without doing some sort of an apprenticeship and having those on the job skills. And in cybersecurity, that's hands-on keyboard, dealing with those real life scenarios that George described. And I don't know where that has to happen, if that's a federal mandate, but across the country, if we don't start having more active apprenticeships and engagement from industry, we're not going to close this gap. Those students coming out of school, they may have a phenomenal education and degree or certification, but they still need that real life experience. And is it mandated? Is it federally mandated? I don't know where that's going to come from, but we do need that real life hands-on keyboard experience before they're going to be successful.
Yeah, and you got to incentivize business, right? That's how much is the government going to pitch in for these internship or apprenticeship programs? That's what will make the difference, I think. I know what George is saying. We're swamped. We're all really, really busy. And to think about the idea of bringing in an unskilled person to train as we go is overwhelming because we're busy. And so, an incentive is pay us to bring in this person or pay the person to come in. And even though we're all really busy, I'm sure none of us here on this call would mind a junior, sub-junior who's willing to take on the menial stuff that we don't want to take on. And I think it starts there is really finding those spots where you can use an unskilled person. And, many people can learn via osmosis just by being in the environment, but also putting together a structured learning program for apprentices to follow and grow. I think it has to be a mandated program, like Kimberly said. Otherwise, it won't happen, right? We're all just too busy.
It's a real challenge for schools to actually connect co-op students to businesses, any business. The Ontario has a specialist high skills major program, SHISM, and what they do with that is part of to get that special diploma, you have to do a co-op. This puts an incredible amount of pressure on schools because, for example, I live in a rural area, so maybe 10,000 people around here, and we've got 1,500 kids in the school. If we want 500 of them to have co-ops, that's pretty much every business in our area has to be taking multiple co-ops. Right. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is if it's traditional tech, there's people understand that pathway. If you want to be a plumber, if you want to be a welder, you can follow those patterns and people understand them. And I think, Kathy, what you said about this being a skilled trade is right on. I think if we took it as an apprenticeship, we're not locking people into some kind of degree program or anything else, and they can see if it fits, because it really doesn't fit everyone. You said, that 90% not chill out, but 90% admin, 10% frantic, you've got to get on top of this, is not something a lot of people enjoy. One last point I'd make as well is, even within the education systems, for example, I've never been able to get a co-op with a college or a university for one of my students. And you would think that would be easy. You'd think there'd be a PhD candidate somewhere who'd be happy to have somebody work in the lab with them, and just do the easy work. But even that connection between high school and post-secondary is not paved. So if you think this is like an into the workplace thing, it isn't. It's actually broken inside education too.
I think a part of the problem, though, there's a couple different things. The first is some people can make the argument that there is no actual staffing shortage in the industry, that, there's only a certain number of seats that can be afforded. There's a plethora of students and folks who are transitioning in that want those shots, but they're not quite right for it. And so the gap that we're seeing might actually be a natural consequence. But at the same time, I would argue, and I think Tim's correct on this point, we're not positioning ourselves to actually develop good cyber talent, not just cyber talent. There still has to be a merit-based approach where, in an ideal world, people are competing for those internships where you're actually getting the cream of the crop. I don't want to gatekeep. Please, please, please don't take it this way. but not everyone is meant for this game, unfortunately, right? You hire some people and they wash out, they burn out, they can't handle the shift schedule, they can't handle the mids, they can't handle the help calls, they can't handle customer service if that's part of it. It's you're dealing with folks who oftentimes have neuroatypical dispositions. And so the way their minds work sometimes don't exactly fit into the commercial market as is expected. So I think the issue is, how do we then, from the high school age or even lower, how do we find the folks who have a natural curiosity and a disposition to be team players and actually want to step into it? And then the other problem too is, you deal with a lot of people that read a lot of hype online, especially if they're looking at some of those American salary figures, thinking that that's what people get paid in Canada. That's not it. You're not going to walk out of a program into a 7-figure job. That's madness. But a lot of folks, it's like you tell them what the real range is, which is around 50 to 60 for an entry level position, and they're like, oh, it's an insult. And you're like, no, I made 52 when I started, man. We have to be more truthful about the thing, right?
George, I think you bring up a really good point. You mentioned expectations, and I think that we are likely not doing a good enough job of managing the expectations of people coming into the workforce. For an example, grads coming out of school. And perhaps, I think, Tim, you mentioned this about the paths. Maybe getting into cybersecurity as your first job is not a realistic expectation. Maybe you need to get in as admin or IT support or what have you, and then learn about the other parts of the organization or technology and leverage and build those soft skills that you mentioned, George, because some of the people that I went to school with, they graduated in professional services. One was a lawyer. He didn't like it after 5 years. He's like, I'm out. I'm doing something different. So I don't think cyber is unique in that perspective. They may not be cut out for it. And maybe managing their expectations of what job one out of school looks like is our fault. We need to do a better job.
Some amazing points.
And
go ahead, Tim.
Some of my strongest classroom, academic students, really struggle with cyber because it comes at them obliquely. They're used to working linear problems really well. They like structure. They like consistency. Like George says, in a lot of cases, they're approaching it from a neurotypical way, and they like to do it the way they like to do it. And then what I've found is in a competition environment, like say you're doing a capture the flag or something, you see a different side. And when I see a kid in that, and they're more like a terrier, they grab the pant leg and they won't let go. That kid has a better chance of surviving in cyber than the kid who's a math quant who just finds, working out the algorithms easy.
With that in mind, though, this is where I get into the different roles within cyber. And we tend to kind of, the educational system, I think, tends to go down this very technical path. But there is a place for people who are very structured and controlled. I mean, we call it governance, risk, and compliance, right? Like it's literally the thing the technical people don't want to deal with. It is the compliance. In fact, there was somebody I was mentoring. She recently came out of one of these programs that we're talking about, and she was a little bit stressed at the end of the program. She didn't even think she was going to do well in it, but she graduated, and then she was having a very hard time finding a job. And I talked to her, said, "What are you looking for?" SOC analyst and pen tester, and she wasn't getting calls back and wasn't getting any of these jobs. And I said to her, have you thought about GRC compliance? And she got back to me not too long ago to say she got a job at a hospital as a compliance coordinator. And this is great for, she's coming out of the insurance industry, actually. Perfect alignment. And so I think this is part of where we need to really discuss what are those different roles in cyber, and are the schools really making it clear that it's not, like we said, not everybody can take this technical path. It's not for everybody, but there are other paths that might be better suited. And the system, even to have one cybersecurity course program doesn't make sense to me. Cybersecurity is an umbrella. We need a bunch of different programs running underneath that umbrella.
So just to move on to another subject, and feel free to weave this in as well, right? All the things we're talking about now, because they're all interconnected. Let's talk a bit about the gatekeepers, the HR departments, the recruiters that are looking at all these resumes coming in and making your choices. Do they understand the requirements of cybersecurity? The recruiters, do they understand what they're looking for in those skill sets that Tim and George and all of you have been mentioning, or do they take it? Here's a job description, and this is what I need, and it's been given to me, and I need to follow these standards. And do they even look for things like individuals that might have different skill sets, like you were mentioning with the individual you were helping on with GRC? So let's open that up and get your thoughts.
I can share the feedback that I get from a lot of the customers that I work with. And depending if it's private sector or public sector, there's obviously a difference there. Public sector traditionally has different bands or categories of jobs that they can post within, and they're fairly handcuffed with what they can do. Now, that doesn't mean they don't understand that there's a challenge in finding those resources and they have a desire to fix that problem, but they're still bound within certain constraints. So I think it depends on the organization. I think there's lots that are getting more creative. You look at public sector often loses their employees to private sector because they can afford to pay more. Now, that's just a fact of the way that those two different sectors are funded. But the getting creative, does extra time off mean something? Does, offering them additional education, paid education opportunities? I think there needs to be a lot more creativity if they want to attract those resources. And now I'm talking a little bit more about, not just the fresh grads coming out of universities, but people that might be looking to, switch gears in their career and do a different role. I think sometimes those transferable soft skills, whether it's communication, that, genuine sense of curiosity, desire to fix problems, those are things that are very underrated and should be more looked at, I suppose.
Can I ask everyone just, I think a lot of the problem on the gatekeeping piece comes from the fact that we have a crisis in good technical writing for job posters and descriptions. I don't know about you guys, but when I look at some of the job postings out there for like even entry-level jobs, I'm just like, I'm a CISO. I don't even know half this junk. Like the Google machine's my best friend. Talk to any other operator, it's the same thing. So I'm like, if I'm someone like young, or if I'm new to this field and it's already overwhelming, am I going to look at like a job poster with umpteen list of qualifications where it's just like, yeah, I just did hack the box a bunch and I thought it was really fun. I have Wireshark, it's cool. Dude, if you came to me with that and you showed like good curiosity and you want to be a team player, I'll hire you. I don't care about the person with 12 certs. So I think we have to educate folks from an HR, staffing, recruitment, consulting standpoint that the public sector style of like fit all these boxes and check everything off, which I think, by the way, really handcuffs the public sector's ability to identify, recruit, and hire good talent. You have to be nimble. You have to be able to just look at someone and be like, hey, based on your personality, based on what you're telling me, there is a genuine sense of curiosity, an interest, a passion for this. You know so much that you don't know, but you're willing to take the steps to go on the journey. That's what makes a potential candidate worth investing in. But we aren't even giving people a chance to get to the door of the interview with some of these job descriptions that we're writing. And I don't even know where we begin to fix that.
Yeah. Just for the record, I spent 7 years in the public sector. And I won't do it.
I was a soldier, friend.
This is what got me into cybersecurity, actually. That's why I was like, I gotta go. I mean, not to bash my HR friends, but I stopped working with HR or hiring through HR a long time ago. Anywhere where I can get away with doing my own recruitment, I've been doing that. I write my own job descriptions. I screen my own candidates because of exactly that. I just don't feel like they get it. And my fear is always that they've weeded out the best candidate in the bunch because they were missing something on the list that they thought was really critical. Whereas, I can see through it and I can tell you what I want, what I don't want. It's tiresome, especially in this day and age. You post a job and you get, a ton of junk come in that appear to be qualified. But I find at the end of the day, I'm better off doing it myself. And so I think I don't know how we fix that. Do we have technical people who are willing to, or people who understand who are willing to move into an HR role? Possibly. It's not my area. I don't know.
That's a good point, Catherine.
Yeah, because I've seen so many good candidates fall through the cracks because of the system.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, just to add a comment to that, having worked in a lot of HR departments and recruiting departments in my days, there are some recruiters that do get it. Now, I think one of the biggest challenges is that most recruiters that get into the field use technology to screen applicants.
Right.
And that's the problem. It's not about looking at everybody that's out there. It's about looking at a very small slice of it. And that small slice doesn't fit what we're talking about here today, for the most part. So that's one of the major challenges. Any other thoughts before we change direction?
Just the value in it from a teaching point of view. I'm a strange thing. I've got all these technical certifications, a lot of years of experience. When I came into teaching, I said I would like to teach IT, and they said, you're not qualified. And I said, why not? And they said, because you don't have a comp sci degree. And I said, what does that have to do with IT? I do have 15 years of experience. I'm one of the first 100 people in Ontario to get CompTIA A+, when you had to write all of it instead of just click on a button. None of that mattered, though. So again, it tends to fall into that, what's good? Well, a master's degree is better than a degree, and a degree is better than anything else. And that's just not true. And if we can open things up a little bit and be a little more flexible with how we see people, I think it would differentiate the field a lot too, because you do see an awful lot of the same kinds of people in cybersecurity.
Excellent. Let's switch gears and ask one question in this area that I know some of you want to talk about. Why does Canada seem to have, some challenges with collaboration? And when I talk about that collaboration at all levels, it could be governments, it could be companies working together in associations and universities and colleges. I know I face it every day, just trying to reach out to association and government departments to collaborate with us, just become a free member of the organization to work with us so we can engage with them in different areas. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts.
I think a lot of it has to do with community. And I think the old definition of community is very small, that maybe that's within your own city or your own province or just Western Canada versus Central and East. I love what the Canadian Cybersecurity Network is doing, is breaking down those barriers and saying, we don't need to compete for an audience or attention, that we should be all coming together. And I think the genuine intent is there, that everyone wants to build that community, but I don't think we think national enough. I don't think we think broadly enough. That's what I've seen and where some of those barriers are.
Yeah, what Kimberly said. I think what I was going to say was, we're a very diverse country in that, province to province, we have an identity, right? Like you said, you got Western, we have such a diverse culture that collaboration has become hard. We don't have the same initiatives. We don't have the same focuses. We behave differently. We act differently. And so really what's needed is a national strategy to help unify us in those areas that we need unification.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity is one of those areas. But you're right, Francois, in general, we have this problem across the board when it comes to Canada.
So
and it's partly, sorry, just one comment before the next speaker. I think one of the things that it brings to mind is that people tend to follow the money, right? And if the money is provincial or municipal or national, they have a tendency to not collaborate because they're worried about losing their funding or sharing their funding or whatever it may be, and it causes a lot of problems. Sorry, next.
I just, because I went and did this international thing, and I've been making a point of trying to get out of Canada and seeing sort of how the rest of the world does it. And when you look at how the EU collaborates, or how Asia Pacific collaborates, or even we were in Ghana, and how Africa itself is collaborating, it's really difficult to sit in a meeting where people don't have clean drinking water, but they're all working together to try and secure their cybersecurity. And then you come to a Canadian one and everyone's like, I've got my funding, I'm not going to share it with anyone. After looking back at it, I feel like people tend to use money to isolate themselves. And I think one of Canada's big challenges is it's rich, it's not very old, so that we don't have a history of being together. So whereas, if you go to another country, they could be thousands of years old and they have a common culture, we don't have that. And we're kind of reinventing ourselves now. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity. So it's not always a negative thing. But when it comes to collaborating, we're never going to circle the wagons here with cybersecurity, because we're not built for it. But we could change our minds and we could start moving towards that. All it is a matter of, just changing our national culture.
Yeah, like the way I kind of look at it in the current state of things now, in my experience sitting on some very high level public private boards and in consulting and in different industries, Canadians at the decision-making level who control the purse strings for all this, that could enable all this, have two main concerns. The first is what's in it for me, and a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow. So unfortunately, due to our system, and Tim's right, we're a G7 nation. You know, we are one of the richest nations in the world. However, unfortunately, if you talk to someone and ask them about budget, you ask them about, hey, do you want to invest in this program where I can't really define to you what the ROI is going to be in advance? They want nothing to do with it. So I think as a society, we have to take an altruistic viewpoint. We have to actually accept that we are kind of dependent on each other. Like, if we're going to be part of an integrated national digital supply chain, and this is another huge issue I have, we have to realize that we're ultimately all on the same team, right? Even if we're directly economically competing with one another, right? Like, a big part of why I'm still doing the cyber thing is because I still believe in the defense of Canada. Do I want to do it in a uniform and in a hole in the ground that I dig? No, not necessarily my jam anymore. But this is my contribution for helping defend the country, helping defend our economy. The friends that I deal with in industry at all levels, we all have that same kind of altruistic, like, hey, if this is good for Canada, if this is good for our Ontario, if this is good for our city, we will dedicate the time to help, right? I don't see enough of that attitude. I think if we stopped worrying about satisfying metrics and satisfying ROI and actually put down our selfish, either political or economic interests for 1 second, which, not to get like overly whole of society critical, we have a problem with doing so in Canada. We always keep our political interests in mind. We always keep our personal interests in mind, our financial interests. We can't just put all that aside and be like, hey, let's help each other out in a scalable manner, protect our economy, develop talent, get people hired, and actually make this something we can sustain. The unfortunate truth is, and this is totally a point for debate, of all the countries that have nationalized cyber capabilities, we are a first world country by most economic ratings. But I would argue that in the cyber war, which, you know, there is a global cyber war, I'm sure most people in this call would know it, I think we're really a punching bag on a lot of levels. And there are a lot of countries who, in every other political kind of rating, they would be inferior to us. They absolutely run all over us. And this is our own doing. It's our own problem.
Well said.
Any other comments on this subject before we move on to another, and we'll talk a bit about job seekers themselves? Excellent. Okay. So George, you brought up a point that I think many of us were going to talk about, which is networking. And I think Kimberly mentioned it as well. You know, you really just, you know, as you graduate, before you graduate, you really need to build your network. And I see so many people coming to me for help, you know, and they have no network built. They have nothing. You know, you look at their LinkedIn profile, 10, 20 people, nothing at all. And it's a skill. Developing a network is a skill, and then nourishing it and keeping it active, and, you know, and giving and taking and all those kinds of things. What are your suggestions in regards to how students can build their network? And why is it so important? Why is it so important? Again, I know we talk about this a lot, but I really want to get through to our audience about how they do this. And you know, maybe it's time for us to give a workshop on how you actually do it well.
One of the things I notice with our conferences, they're expensive. They're so incredibly expensive. Are we really expecting students to show up at these things? Have we made it accessible? I know there's some other conferences in Toronto, like Elevate, etc. There's a lot of, I know how to get free tickets to some of those conferences. They're going to have a women in tech line. There's going to be a students track. There's all these different tracks to attract an audience that actually needs the networking. And I find with a lot of our cyber conferences, they're not like that. And even when we have those CISO executive invitation only events, we're closing our doors, right? Like, I get it. I get the need to have certain groups of people together so that they can collaborate together. But I don't know if we've actually created enough opportunity for people to come in and build a network. We've made it kind of exclusive. That's something I noticed for myself, because I want to do more networking. And I'm always like, well, not that event. You know what I mean? If it's going to cost me a couple $1,000s to go, then probably not. And so I think that's something that as a community, we can definitely do better at in terms of helping people trying to get into cybersecurity, give them a way, like walk them through the doors.
I think so too. And I'm going to refer back to ISACA because I am most familiar with them, not because I have a bias towards them. But ISACA does a lot of events. Like every month, there is either an online session or an in-person session. And I think for students, it's a relatively cheap membership. Most of the events are anywhere from, $5 to $50 for the event. Some of them are in fact free. But I think once you're at that event and you've met somebody in person, make sure you connect with them on LinkedIn and send them a message saying, hey, it was great to chat with you. It's nice to meet you. I've been thinking about what we talked about, share some information. A lot of people that you connect with, they want to know, what's in it for them. And there's a lot of people that have been in the industry in a long time, like Catherine and I've been talking about doing mentoring, that what's in it for us when we mentor and we help people is that there's a huge joy to see them succeed and to see them, that smile on their face when they actually start linking either people or networks, or they get their first job, or they get a promotion or a new job. But once you've connected with those individuals on LinkedIn, interact on LinkedIn, post, comment, follow. The way to build your virtual online network then does translate into when you meet that person next in an in-person event. So that would be my tip for sort of creating your network, but make sure you get to those events that are free and that you can be part of.
Yep. And
Yeah,
try. And I tell everybody
ahead.
to talk to a mentor, just ping somebody and ask. If they ignore you, you're no worse off than you were yesterday. But there are some people out there who will give you a 30-minute chat for absolutely no reason at all. So just try.
Yeah. And I think, Kathy, you're absolutely right. And I think, I get a lot of requests every day. I get, I won't even mention the number, but people asking me for help, but they just basically, can you find me a job? Well, that's not the way you want to do it.
Right.
You want to tell me a bit about yourself and your story and what you're actually looking for, so I can have some guidance in how I can help you. And I have something to give back to you and say, yeah, I'm really interested in helping you because of what you told me. So I think there's a lot of people willing to help. It's just how you approach it and how you build on it over time. Remember, the Canadian Cybersecurity Network was built 4 years ago. I started with zero. So this is the community now. It's gotten so big, and you just have to start somewhere and build, and then keep growing it. So I think that's what you have to do. George or Tim, any other additional comments on that question?
From a teacher point of view, I wish we would teach those skills more. The idea of networking. I hear a lot of teachers say that social media is just a waste of time. And most of them aren't on LinkedIn at all. But when you have a job for life, do you need to be on LinkedIn? So that raises some interesting questions. And these are the people teaching students and saying social media is a waste of time, or engaging in it in a productive way is something that we're not even going to teach you. I've not found that at all. I found if you leverage your output in a useful way, it's the opposite. It's really empowering. It gets you through doors you never thought you would get through. And I try and emphasize that with students, that they're always surprised. I'll say, like, go start your LinkedIn account, and we'll put you've just won Cyber Titan and everything else on there. And then they'll come back and say, I just got to talk to somebody who works in cybersecurity. I'm like, and it's that easy, but we don't even teach it.
Right.
You're right, Tim, it does need to be taught.
So I think we need to go even further on this teaching point. My podcast partner and I have a separate podcast wherever it's okay. It's on Spotify. So my co-host and I are actually writing a book that we're going to publish this year, and it's actually about doing cyber as a profession better, like in a more humanized manner. And one of the chapters I'm actually writing right now is how to network, because I think we need to break this down to like a schoolyard, like, hey, can I sit with you at the lunch table kind of level? Like, I go to conferences all the time. I go to events all the time. I went before as a CISO, and now I'm gonna, keep going there as a CISO, as whatever else I do as an executive. I talk to people constantly, and then some people, they come up to you, and especially if they're newer, they're like, "Oh my God, you're this person, you're this kind of role," and then like they're not actually good as a conversation. They're not actually interesting on a human level. And I hate to say it, like, I want to help you, but help me help you by making me like you. And like you said, Francois, like tell me something interesting about you. Like be willing to be, we'll say, appropriately vulnerable. Talk about yourself. It's not just about I want a job. Here's what I can do for you. Blah blah blah. I've done this education. I've done that. I don't care. I don't care. I've like a million things happening right now. I'm at a conference. I'm exhausted. I haven't slept. I'm probably a little hungover, for being like honest. I want this conversation to be valuable. Tell me about how you came from X country in Asia. Tell me about how, in your past life and in previous country, you were in an Olympic program to do football or something like that. Tell me something interesting about you that endears you to me. And then let's talk about how we can place you in the field, because what this speaks to is you at a human level, you might be a good fit. Other people have to work with you, might like you. Clients might like you, customers might like you, other executives might like you. I can develop you. I can create succession plans around you because I fundamentally like you. Where I think we need to teach people, it's not just about enabling them to get to the show, because everything else you guys have talked about are very accurate points of like, how do we get to the right platforms? How do we get to the right events? Cool, you're on the platform, you're on the event. What value do you actually bring? Why should anyone want to talk to you? I hate to be kind of rough and critical about it, but we have to tough love folks to be like, guys, go to a bar or go to an event, go make friends, go learn how to make friends. It's really just that simple.
Well, let me say this, because you say it's simple. I consider myself an extroverted introvert. And I wasn't always extroverted, I was always introverted. And although I can talk to anybody, starting a conversation was incredibly difficult for me.
Yeah.
Virtual opened the door and really made that a little more accessible, and I could have if you agreed to a meeting, then good. That was the intro when we got going. But in person was still really hard. And so what I started doing was taking my husband everywhere. And he's not in tech at all, but he's been to a lot of conferences with me.
Nice.
Just wasn't alone. And being able to bring somebody else along with me gave me a little more courage. And he's the social one anyway. But it did help me, open the doors. So that's one recommendation I would give to people. If you're going to go out to in-person events, if you're the kind like me who's not great at starting conversations, bring a friend. Bring your most social and bubbly friend with you, and get some way to get that conversation started. Because like George said, it needs to be an interesting conversation. But if you struggle with that, get help. Get somebody to come along with you.
Catherine saying bring a wingman.
Yeah, exactly.
I appreciate that.
And Catherine, you're so right. I believe I'm the same as you. I was deathly shy when I was younger. And what I've found in my career, now I'll just talk to anybody, but what I found is you'd get to an event and you'd be standing there shaking or sweating, but you'd go talk to somebody and you almost glommed onto each other because you found out they felt the same way too. So I feel like for new people building their network, guess what? There's a lot of people that feel like you are, and they're just waiting for somebody to come talk to them. So go talk to them, say hello. That's all you need to start with.
Enthusiasm is really underestimated too. You don't need to be a genius. You don't need to know the right people. You don't need to have taken a degree. Being enthusiastic is free. All you got to do is just grab it and run with it. And I'm an introvert with no extrovert, but I'm enthusiastic about trying to get kids on the right path, so I can get in front of anyone, and that enthusiasm comes across. Be enthusiastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting that the majority of us are, introverts in many ways, because I'm an introvert. I'm an extrovert in business, but you put me in a big room and I'm the same way. So I started my strategy by just picking out the people that were alone and going to talk to them when I was younger, and, then growing into a larger group. So yeah, I think it's a great thing to work on early on, and they should be doing, as Tim mentioned, in high school. They should be working on this from a high school perspective. Let's talk a bit about technical skills. We haven't talked much about it. Technical skills are changing, AI, quantum, all these amazing things that are coming into our lives, and they're going to have a huge impact. I would say more on, where cybersecurity is going, maybe not the skill sets that we talked about, although we need to be aware. We need to be aware of what the advantages are in these technologies. What are your thoughts in regards to those things, but also in regards to just change and how job seekers need to adapt to it moving forward?
I'd really like to hear from Tim on this one, because this was something I was thinking about from a curriculum perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the curriculum is 10 years behind. The curriculum I in Ontario was made in 2009. Like it's ancient, and they're like, but and when are they going to upgrade it? Who knows? What I started doing was just going after what can I see coming, and then we would just start getting it. So we were doing VR in 2015. We were coding AI in 2018. So I've had students come back to me now in university and say, "Why is everyone freaking out about this now?" And I don't know. We knew about it years ago. But I think my dad gave me the best advice on this. A long time ago, we were working on a head gasket on my terrible student car. And he's a mechanic by trade and a machinist. And he took it apart, put it back together. The car worked perfect. And I said, "You've never touched one of these before. How did you know what to do?" And he said, "If a person built it, I can figure out how to fix it." And for me, I've always approached everything that way. So when I started as a millwright and got into IT, I was the same way. I was like, "Well, this is electronic. I haven't done that before, but I can figure it out." And I do. So it's almost like if we did curriculum as discovery, then that lets you jump into things that suddenly seem like they're just so off in the distance. Doing all the quantum stuff I did in the fall for this research, I kind of felt like, what am I doing? Like, what am I, Scotty from Star Trek? Like, what's happening here? And and at the end of it, people kept coming. Somebody at the conference called me Dr. King, and I'm like, whoa, I'm miles away from a PhD. Like, but I am not afraid to just jump in and figure out how something works. And even in cyber, like that's a skill set by itself, right? Like that ability to deconstruct something and just say, "Oh, I see how it works now." I really wish we would approach more things that way instead of saying, by the end of this course, students will know how to do this, this, and this. And 3 out of 4 of them are knowledge things that you could read on the internet. Like George said, like, am I good at cybersecurity, or am I really good at looking stuff up? I've had students say that in the competition, George. So that's my take on it. That's why I'm not afraid, because you can figure it out. It's not.
So just to go to some questions a little bit, I know we're running out of time, and there's been a lot of interest. I'll guarantee you in the comments, people are really saying some great things about panelists. Let's ask a few questions. What can make candidates stand out from entry-level roles in the saturated market? And I think we've answered some of those things already, but I think this is a question that a lot of people have on their minds.
To be honest with you, that they have a diverse life outside of cyber and outside of work, that they're into doing things, that they're passionate about stuff. Like if someone's passionate about other things and they're like new to cyber, then I know they're capable of being passionate. So we can work together and find where their passion is here. But if they don't reveal anything, if they don't do any community associations, they don't do any volunteering, they don't play any sports, it's like, well, what do you do? Like, how do you engage with this person? And I'm seeing the comments, and I'm seeing some people be like, yes, some people are very introverted. That's cool. That's cool. You could be introverted. You can still do stuff that you find cool. You don't have to do the things I find cool. You have to do the things that you find cool and be proud of them. If someone does that on a resume or can convey that in an interview, you're way above the rest of the field.
Do it enthusiastically.
Yes, be excited.
Yes. And I think that's, that word passion, and then I'll take it outside of cybersecurity, I'll just take it to life in general. This is a really important point that most people you have to have passions in life. You have to believe in things, and that comes out in an interview, or it comes out when you're talking to people, if you're at a conference. Let's see some other question here. We probably have time for one more. There's one here specifically for George, and others can comment. George, what do you think a candidate could do to develop those problem-solving skills you feel candidates are lacking?
Well, I think like Tim and Catherine have talked quite a lot about it. It's putting yourself in different roles and putting yourself in different positions. And then, if you're not in the industry already, then what you really could do is look at what's available freely, right? What can you access that you don't have to pay for, and give it a try. And I think, I don't know, you folks, you guys are all like leadership level folks as well. If I see that someone at least has made the effort to try a diversity of different things, and they've tried to show that, hey, I've tried to solve problems this way. I've tried to learn how to adapt to different scenarios here. I can show you some labs. Like, by the way, if you're applying for a cyber job and you already have practice labs set up, like, bless you, you're probably gonna get hired, but no one else seems to want to do that. Just a little tip. But if you're showing like, hey, I did this thing, here's my work, here's what I learned from it, oh boy, how do you not hire someone like that? Like, how do you not take that kind of problem-solving little flame and turn that into a forest fire?
Mhm.
Excellent.
With those
So,
things,
go ahead, Kathy.
just to add to that, because like George said, there's resources online to learn problem solving. There's challenges, there's contests or whatever. Try things that where the cost is low, so that if you fail, right? But you need a lot of practice. You got to keep trying. You got to get better by failing a few times and getting it wrong and trying again. So especially for high school students, I say all the time, like the cost is so low, the barriers are so low to fail when it comes to failing. Try everything. And if you suck at it, at least now you know you suck at it. But try everything and see where you get, right?
Excellent. So just to kind of end, let's take a comment or one thing that you would recommend to our audience. Kind of final words of wisdom from all our panel before we close off. Tim?
I'll go to the sticky one about we just have to change our entire national culture. Because everybody kind of looked at that one when we were planning this. I think if we can approach things from a are we in this together point of view, and I think we can all understand that we are. As George said, all of our critical infrastructure is underlaid by IT now. If we don't look after that, the lights go out, it gets cold really quickly. There are a lot of reasons why we need to look after each other with this. And that means if you do something stupid online in Montreal, you could end up making people go dark in Winnipeg. And that you are literally in the same community as them when it comes to digital spaces. So if we could start getting Canadians to feel a sense of unity online and in terms of approaching digital skills, I think that would just solve so many other things. And eventually we would get a few unicorns out who really want to do cybersecurity.
Thanks, Timothy. Quickly now, George.
Be curious. Like, at the end of the day, you are not going to survive a day, let alone a career in this industry, if you are not curious, like at your very, very core. We are in the business of solving problems. Forget code, forget networks, forget tools. We're in the business of solving problems. And even if on the GRC side as well, hey, there's a thing, it's screwed up. We need a process. Okay, how do we govern that? Okay, you're solving a problem. Be curious and never lose that curiosity. That's going to be like the bedrock of your career.
Kimberly?
Yeah, absolutely. So just tagging on to what George says, I think really get to the root of why do you want a career in cybersecurity? Look at that document that Tim shared with respect to cyber domains and share that broadly. Share why you want to be in it. Share what problems you want to solve and show that passion.
Mm-hmm. So aligned with both George and Kimberly there. It's especially if you're making a move from a different career and another background into cybersecurity, try and really identify what those transferable skills are. Don't necessarily stick to that technical path. You don't necessarily have to throw away everything you've done in your experience. Really find a way to map what you have in your background into your future and make sure you're looking for jobs in the right area that complement those skills.
Excellent. So we are going to have a recording of this session. We are also going to do an article that will pull most of these points together. I want to thank all of the panelists in our audience today. And for the panelists, if you're interested, feel free to go backstage for a final kind of debrief. And we'll look forward to doing more of these types of sessions in the future. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, friends.
Bye.